Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you at the first ever International Conference on Agricultural Law. First of all, I would like to thank the co-organizer of this event, the International Bar Association and its Agricultural Law section, and personally, Mr. Peter Bartlett, the chair of the Legal Practice Division, who is present with us today. So for Ukraine, agricultural law is of utmost importance in view of the recent adoption of the law on agricultural land and the subsequent opening of the land market. This step brought Ukrainian legislation in compliance with the international obligation and with the best European practices. In particular, by allowing privatization of agricultural land, Ukraine successfully executed the judgment of the European Court of Human Rights in the case of Zelenchuk and Tsitsura versus Ukraine. So free and open turnaround of land will definitely boost the investment climate. However, the adoption of the law and by adoption of this law, the land reform has only started. Ukraine has to undertake a few more measures, in particular, develop the necessary subsidiary legislation, conduct an audit of the land in Ukraine and put in place an effective institutional system for land management. Make sure that the system of property titles registration is functioning well and the judicial system is ready to review the disputes concerning land and put in place the necessary IT technologies that would allow transparent, fair, and effective transfer of land rights. I'm hopeful that today's event can contribute to some of these questions. I would be interested to also hear about the experience of other countries in building the land market. And to this, I'm very glad to see many renowned international professionals with us today. The Ukrainian Bar Association stands ready to support the national authority and the legal community in further implementation of the land reform. We hope that new forums on agricultural law would become a convenient platform for stock taking and planning the way forward. So thank you very much. And Peter, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Many thanks, Anna. I actually was looking forward to my first visit to Ukraine for the agricultural conference last year and then earlier this year. I hope that in the future, the Ukraine Bar will support this conference to the same degree and that we can actually have a face-to-face conference in Kiev in the future. As you mentioned, this is the first agricultural law section of IBA Agricultural Conference. And I think that in itself is very significant. I think it's wonderful to see the support that's been given by the Ukrainian Bar Association. We thank Anna and all of your officers for that wonderful support. We also congratulate the officers of the Agricultural Law Section, led by Sarah Moyo from Zimbabwe. That section is the newest section of the IBA, and it is wonderful to see that it's starting a tradition by this conference. I'd also like to thank Tetiana, who has also done a wonderful job as event coordinator in assisting in the organisation of the conference. And again, congratulate the Ukrainian Bar Association. I note that next year is your 20th anniversary and something to really celebrate. I note that you represent some 6,000 lawyers in Ukraine which is a very, very impressive number. And I also note, like the IBA, that you have great support for young lawyers that are coming through the law schools of Ukraine and the lawyers of the future. So I think the world has seen many conferences in the past that touch on issues that are relevant to agriculture, like mining and water and IP, climate change and others. But this is actually the first that's centered entirely on agriculture. And I think that we need to take our hats off to the agricultural law section with the support of the Ukrainian Bar for organising this. We also thank all of those supporters. I think the Ukrainian law firms have also been very supportive of this conference, as have other Ukrainian companies. Burum Law from Amsterdam, again, a great supporter with Jan. The organising committee is very impressive with Jan and Vladimir Sayenko. So we also thank them. And I think it's important to note that it's very appropriate that this conference actually be in the Ukraine. I read that the Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, one of the world's largest agricultural producers and exporters. The sector contributes something like 10% of GDP in Ukraine. It has 30% of the world's richest soil, black soil. So it is so appropriate that this conference actually be in Ukraine. I think when you all look at the list of speakers and sessions for this conference, it is very, very impressive. So I thank Anna and everyone associated with, and Sarah and everyone associated with organising the conference. I wish you well with the conference, with all of the sessions. And I hope that there will come a day when we can have a face-to-face conference in Kiev. So many, many thanks. And so I think now I turn over to Jan.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anna and Peter, for all the kind words and for the introduction. We are very happy, of course, as Agricultural Law Section to set up this first international conference. And I'm also very delighted to start as a moderator in section 1 of the conference. The subject of the conference is land market liberalization, and then more referring to agricultural land market liberalization and best practices on land reform. We have, in this section, we have 4 speakers, and we will start first with the speaker Oleg Nievieski, who is an assistant professor at the Kiev School of Economics and also a coordinator, as you will see in the program, of the EU Food Trade Research Project. Then we will continue with some additional remarks to be made by Oleg Simes. Then I hope that Mr. Mansouri is able to join. He would call in from Iran. And then the last speaker, but not the least, would be Professor Rankouni, who will then discuss land reform experiences in Africa. I will introduce each speaker before they start, and each of the speakers have around 8 minutes to make a presentation. And we try to be strict on the presentation so that we have enough time left for the Q&A within the hour that we have left for the session one. As Peter is saying, the occasion of this conference is really the liberalization of land reform in Kiev, and then put it into a wider context. And there is a lot to gain from this, of course. If you compare that 30% of all European Union land is part of eventually Ukraine, and that they have 25% of the world's best land. There's a lot to gain. And if you see now that in Holland, we have 100% more production than you could reach in eventually in the Ukraine. That means if you modularize that whole capacity of agricultural land in the Ukraine, then the potential is tremendous. I would really like to start now with the first speaker, Mr. Oleg Nivievsky, who will deal with the subject of the ban on the moratorium of farmland and the impact that that might have. I think eventually it will lead to a lot of questions, to what extent also foreign investors are able to take part in this modernization, and on what kind of terms, with what kind of period, and that would eventually lead to, I think, some more questions in Q&A. Mr. Oleg Nivievsky, I would like to give you the floor. You have more than 8 minutes, because we discussed you would also take part of the time we attributed to Oleg Simes, and feel free to elaborate on this very interesting and important subject. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jan. Hello, everybody. Glad to be in this conference. Jan, how many minutes do I have exactly? So more than.
Well, I think maximum you could have is 18 minutes, and then we will skip Simes, Oleg Simes. So it's up to you to divide your time, and we will see how things are going. If Mr. Mansouri would not be able to call in, then you would have a little bit more time even.
Okay, clear. So let me share my presentation. I represent Kyiv School of Economics, the Center for Food and Land Use Research, and just a bit of information why I'm basically presenting this, because right now we are heavily involved in land market reform in Ukraine, specifically helping technically the government of Ukraine, and also specifically the big World Bank and EU program on land reform in Ukraine. So they've been supporting the government of Ukraine since ages, I would say, and now we have also kind of another phase of this program. So let me say a few words about the land reform and some particular issues related to economic and legal framework of the current land reform in Ukraine. So this is my outlines. I'll be briefly telling you about the land market, how it's been structured, then a bit of information on the land market reform impact at the moment, and then on the comprehensive land reform agenda going on right now in Ukraine. So, I mean, Jan and others repeatedly demonstrated that the stock of really high quality fertile soil in Ukraine is substantial. A third of the most fertile land in the world is located in Ukraine. So you see here the green spots of on this map, and so you have in Ukraine, in Argentina, in the United States of America, and approximately you can guess that a third of the farmland stock is basically in Ukraine, and this is really fertile, so-called black soil. The endowment is quite substantial, and the same about land. If you talk about if you compare it to the land stock in Europe, so you see how much land of arable land we have in Ukraine compared to other European countries. In terms of ownership, it's interesting situation that out of 42. A bit more than 82 million hectares of land, of agricultural land, which is about 70% of total country area. In private hands, we have right now more than 30 million hectares of land. Then we have a little bit owned by communities, so it's communal land. Then we have less than 1 million of hectares in state ownership. And then you see here, I have a question marks. I mean, 5 million hectares, it's really, nobody knows where this land is. So either this is owned by private people or state owned or owned by the state. So it's not clear. So this is the current, because of the problems in the cadastre in the records, but it's not clear. It looks like it's private right now, but no clear answer from the government. But this is the distribution of ownership of agricultural land in Ukraine. In terms of the market structure, we have again the farmland, about 42 million hectares of land, and then it could be either leased, right? So this is the one channel of transferring land between the market participants. And in the legal or registered lease, we have up to 21 million hectares of land. And another channel of transferring the land, these are the sales market. It was basically non-functioning until the July 1st this year. But before that, still about 4 million of hectares of land was still tradable. It's a special type of land, and I will not talk about that in detail right now. But under the moratorium or under the sales ban, there was about 38.5 million hectares of land, quite substantial chunk of land, about 66% of Ukraine's territory, quite substantial break on agricultural development in Ukraine. And overall, already Jan mentioned that 10% of agriculture, 10% of GDP is generated by agriculture, and 45% of foreign exchange is also coming from agri-food exports. So quite substantial role in this sector in the Ukrainian economy, and also in terms of export potential. So if you convert all the exports that we have of grain, in particular exports that we have from Ukraine, so literally about 400 million of people in the world are basically fed by this grain. So if you take this conversion factor of grain into the food, so quite substantial role in the global economy, I would say, from Ukraine. In terms of the farm structures, because it's important to to understand a little bit the farm structures in Ukraine to know the impact of the land sales moratorium that we have that we had for 20 years already. I will talk about that a bit later, but we have sort of two types, broad types of agricultural producers. So we have agricultural commercial producers, so legally registered entities, and we have household farms, which are not registered in a sense, legally registered farms. And then each of them, so commercial producers, they cultivate about 21 million hectares of land, and household or individual farms, they cultivate about 16 million hectares of land, so a little bit less. But they generate a lot. They generate about 44% of total agricultural output. Within the commercial producers, we also have sort of structuring into the small individual farmers, legally registered farmers. Then we have so-called agri-holdings, so mega farms. And you see some statistics on the slide, how much they cultivate and how much they produce. And we have independent commercial agricultural companies. These are usually medium-sized companies, which also produce a lot in Ukraine. But basically, why that important to look at? Because if we look in this picture more in details, we see that basically the small farmers from that basically you see on the previous slides, they basically work on their own land, so that they lease not much, and that's really important. That the moratorium that we had before was really a substantial hurdle for that development, because they couldn't use the land that they basically cultivated in order to attract the investments and have more space for development. So compared to the medium and large farms, they had this negative impact. The moratorium that we had since 2001 was quite substantial and had quite negative impact on agricultural development. You see some statistics on the slides. So it's a violation of human rights. Somebody mentioned already the court in the European case. So we had a European court case against the moratorium. Then other negative impact is the soil erosion, basically a raw material structure of the production in Ukraine, and also the structure of the export also mimicked the structure of domestic production. Because that affected a lot the prices for land market for the land in Ukraine. That also affected negatively the wealth of rural people that mainly own that land. So their wealth, because of the depressed farmland prices, also was depressed in a sense. And since a lot of local resources or local taxes depend on land, so because of the depressed land prices, the revenues of the rural communities, they also were depressed. So that means that the villages or rural areas had less resources for development because of the moratorium, and that was quite a substantial impact. Rural financing also was far from potential. I mean, if you look at the credits that we have in Ukraine, agricultural credits, they are mainly they are not backed by non-land assets. So you don't see land as a collateral behind those credits. While in the US, for instance, 65% of all the debt is backed by farm real estate. I'm not talking about the levels, of course. I mean, because in the level of credits in the US is really far from what we have in Ukraine, but still this is really a problem for agricultural development and productivity. And as a result, and we have that empirical evidence available, that if we didn't have that moratorium for 20 years, the agricultural productivity in Ukraine would be more than 2 times higher than it's currently at the moment. So there is a paper that was produced by me and my co-author Olga Halitsa. So we kind of try to estimate it econometrically, and this is the result that we have. So more than 2 times higher than it's now in terms of agricultural productivity. And if you look at the current productivity levels, you see that despite the really fertile soil, the agricultural productivity levels in Ukraine are really far behind our competitors and even neighbors. So agricultural land turnover law, I think majority of you know the setup, but the current setup is the following. So key issues there are that state and communal lands are out of the market forever, so they cannot be traded at the moment, and there is no point in time where it's going to be allowed. So it only lease. This is the only option that exists for state and communal land. Foreigners are not allowed to buy land in Ukraine and until the so-called referendum, but we don't know when this referendum will happen. So we basically assume that at the moment foreigners do not have an access to agricultural land. And until 2030, the pricing is the following: that the land could not be traded less than the minimum price, which is established by so-called normative land price. On average, this is about $1,000 per hectare. Also, we introduced the land market in 2 phases until 2024. We have the market without legal entities, so the legal entities are not allowed to buy agricultural land, only physical persons and commercial banks, in order to develop the financing, the rural financing in Ukraine. And we have an ownership cap, which is up to 100 hectares of land. Legal entities will come into the market only in 2024, and then the ownership cap will be increased up to 10,000 hectares of land. So this is basic setup for agricultural land market in Ukraine. And we also have some when we were helping the government to design such a market, we had quite a lot of simulations, and we used that work is done with Klaus Daninger from the World Bank. So using the classical partial equilibrium analysis, we built up various scenarios for the land market design, which include, whether we have foreigners or not, with what kind of caps do we have in the design, whether there is a support to small producers or not. So all this type of things we included into the simulation model and just looked at what's going on, and we did it based on the real farm level data that we have in Ukraine. So what comes out using this particular design that we have at the moment is that if a key ingredient in this design is available, I mean the support to small farmers in terms of accessing the credits and accessing the state support, the simulated additional agricultural GDP or value added would be $2.2 billion, which is approximately 1.5% of GDP. Okay, but if this support is not available, I mean the small farmers, the support to small farmers, then the output or outcome of this reform will be substantially lower, even to negligible, 170 million. 17 million basically value added. So this is the key factor.
Oleg, this is
yeah.
Jan. I can allow another 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean that's enough. I mean I will. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Thank you. So if you are interested in monitoring the daily transactions in the land market, the State Geocadastre, this is the authority that is controlling land in Ukraine at the moment, introduced so-called monitoring of land market, of land relations. So they daily update the land transactions in Ukraine. So you can go to the land to their web page and see daily what is the dynamics of the land transaction. This is, you can find the source on the slide, and you see that I mean I think I made this picture yesterday. So the average stock of land that was traded until now since July 1st is about 50,000 hectares of land. Not really many transactions, but still it's going, it's evolving. Also, we launched a new analytical product with the Ministry of Agriculture that monthly analyzes the land market in Ukraine and provides some key statistical information and and analyzing some focus topics on that. So you can also find some sources where this product is available. And you see here the dynamics of development of the land transaction in hectares terms. So basically not in units but in hectares. So you see that the land market is evolving and is getting more and more dynamic. So which is very encouraging, I would say. But what I'd like to finish up my presentation with is basically that this land reform is not the only step that we have right now. It's just one brick in really comprehensive agenda. You see the table here, which I think lays down well, maybe this is entire or the whole overview of the land reform agenda that we have right now. You see on the left. In the left panel, you see the approved laws that we have that are in the land reform agenda. We have 3 laws waiting for final voting, which is on the partial credit guarantee fund to help small farmers, and we have on water use associations to launch the irrigation, which is also related to the land issues, and we have the law on the land privatization law. And also 2 laws are waiting for further development and voting in the parliament. And we have 3 institutions to be set up, which is the comprehensive monitoring of land government system. Then we have state agrarian registry to help small farmers in order to have a good competitive power with all other farmers in the sector. And we also have this institution partial credit guarantee fund. The full picture of the current land reform you can find in the white paper that we prepared together with the colleagues from the World Bank and from the Ministry of Agricultural Policy. We have there 7 really strategic priorities, more than 100 measures to be adopted and developed in order to have land reform successful in Ukraine. So if interested, please download it. It's freely available, and you can see the entire picture of the land reform that we have right now in Ukraine. So basically, that's it. That's what I wanted to share with you. I'd be happy to answer the questions if there are any.
Yeah, thank you so much, Oleg, for this very comprehensive presentation, not only on the law, but also on the policy and some of the history. It shows indeed the enormous capacity that can be gained if this policy would eventually be successful. And it might lead to quite some questions in our Q&A time. Thank you for staying in the time limit that we agreed. This will then come to our next speaker, who would be Oleg Simes. Oleg, you would probably have a limited time, as we discussed earlier. As an introduction, Oleg Simes is a partner of Sayenko Karenko and the advisor to the US Ukraine Business Council. He has a significant experience in the sector, working for a large international grain trading company, and he advised numerous agricultural companies and governments on agricultural policy. He is also the coordinated development. He also coordinated development of Ukraine's national strategy on agriculture and rural developments, and he served as an advisor to the Minister of Agriculture of the Ukraine. Thank you, Oleg, for being here. In the limited time you have, we agreed you would comment on the presentation of Oleg. Maybe if it is acceptable for you, you could maybe elaborate in 5 minutes or so on the possibilities and the opportunities that foreign companies and foreign investors might have in the new extensive agenda on land reform and privatization. Because if I understand it, it will take some time before companies can be part of this whole program, and even more time before foreign companies can be part. I think it would be very informative if you could elaborate a little bit on this and other subjects that you find appropriate, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Oleg, for comprehensive presentation on the land reform. I would like to emphasize that today is a significant day for Ukraine, because 30 years Ukrainian owners were deprived from the right to sell the land. So they had the assets and they were not being able to sell it. On the other side, the farmers, they were not being able to plan on the long term their activities, because the usage of the land was limited by the number of the years of the lease agreements. In the average, it is 7 years. And of course, for the grain production is okay, but for the long investments, which requires 20 years, 15 years payback, it's too little. And the farmers, they wanted to have the assurance that their land will stay with them. They can invest in the land, they can put the irrigation systems, they can put the vegetables, they can put the fruit trees, etc. So it's a great day for Ukraine, and thank you, IBA, for choosing Ukraine as a key topic. I would like to emphasize that Oleg already mentioned that there are 47 million of the farmland in Ukraine, And if you take even $1,000 per 1 hectare, the price of the land, like we are coming to the asset, which is $47 billion, like which was previously frozen in Ukraine. And you cannot use these assets in order to pledge, in order to attract the finance. And now, step by step, Ukraine is opening its way. I would like to say that until 2024, that is a trial period, like because the Ukrainian government, the farmers, the population, they will see how the system will work. So because 100 hectares, like for Ukraine, is not a big parcel of the land which can be in the ownership. After 2024, it will be 10,000, which is already the significant farm. And I would say it's an average farm, because it's a little bit strange for Europe, because the average farm is from like 3,000 hectares to 30,000 hectares, like, and the big farms, like Oleg already mentioned, up to 700,000 hectares, which is like really a big companies. So what will be possible after 2024? It's 10,000 hectares, which is already a significant part, and you can invest, like you can plan your activities. What is also important is that the banks can provide the financing to buy the land, and they can take the pledge over the land. Because previously, the financing to the agricultural market was very limited. But there is one thing that the banks, like they should sell the land within 2 years after they will acquire the right to the land. What are the issues currently? We are seeing that the biggest issue is an administration, because due to the heavy limitation on the ownership land, the notaries have to check also like how many hectares this or that person is having in their ownership, including the relatives, including the related parties.
Oleg, one remark, you have a 1.5 minute left. Mr. Sorey also joined, so that would, okay, yeah.
And basically the notaries, they're providing the financial monitoring. So it's a little bit delaying the speed of the execution of the transactions and also the cost of the transaction, because the cost of the transaction to buy the land could be up to 20–25% from the value of the land which is in the transaction. But in general, it's a big step forward. We are looking forward that the situation will improve with the administration of the land purchase contracts. And of course, one of the issues that the international resources and finances is very limited, because the owners of the land cannot be the foreigners at this point of stage. When the referendum will be done, but we do not have exact dates and at least the time frame, there will be more and more opportunities and also for the foreign companies in order to invest and in order to finance agriculture. Thank you, Jan.
Okay, thank you, Oleg. It's very interesting to see that you already think on financing and the opportunity to access additional financing that was originally not available because of this whole reform, which makes money available for investment and hopefully sustainable investment in agricultural land. I guess some additional questions will come up on this, but we will leave that. I see that some questions are coming up, but we will leave that for the Q&A session after we have finished the speakers. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Mansouri. Mr. Mansouri is currently the head of Urban Planning Research Group in the Land Affairs Organization of Iran. This organization tries to prevent unrestrained exploitation of agricultural land use for urban sprawl. And in the past, he has worked as an expert in the land reform and the land tenure in the same organization. He has also worked as a consultant of the Food and Agricultural Organization on land tenure in Iran. Mr. Mansouri, thank you so much that you join us in this webinar conference from Iran. I understood you also have a presentation. Feel free to share the presentation on your screen, and you have around 8 minutes to elaborate on the topic. So we stay within the time frame and still have time left for Q&A. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to be with you. I will immediately go to my presentation as what I want to what I will be discussing here today is the effects of liberalization of land in Iran in combination with extremely high inflation rates and currency exchange rates that have had devastating consequences for agricultural lands. Please allow me to share my screen. What happened in, I don't know if you have my screen right now. Do you have it? Do you have my screen?
I think we do not have it, but I think you can just elaborate on your presentation, and then without the sheets being available, I think that will also work.
Okay. What happened in Iran and what I want to discuss today is in the past years, agriculture had not been a way of investment for non-farmers. But our parliament tried to liberalize land and allow non-farmers to invest in agriculture. At the same time, inflation kicked in, and we had incredibly high inflation in the country, sometimes up to 500%. And we also had, at the same time, laws that facilitated land use change. The result was that the price of land, and especially agricultural land, raised to incredibly high numbers. People started to look at agricultural lands as a very safe way of investment, because compared to other ways of investment, financial investment, such as gold, for example, land was a safer bet. And because when they changed land use from agriculture to other land uses, especially urban land use and housing, the amount of money that they got was incredibly high, sometimes 80 times, sometimes even 100 times the money that they had invested. So people started looking at land as a very attractive way of investment. They noticed agricultural land as something that could make them rich overnight. Land practically turned into gold. Instability in the stock market boosted this problem, and we had people who started buying land, usually in small parcels, because regulations had already allowed them, and they started buying lands in small parcels. And when you buy land in agricultural land in the small parcels, you cannot use them for agriculture anymore. And since the regulations that the parliament was putting in place allowed them to buy land in small parcels and made it easy for them to change land use, we had a crisis in the country. Millions of people were buying agricultural lands in incredibly small land parcels, and they were looking for ways to exploit regulations and laws to change land use. When it came to comparing currency exchange rates, the price of agricultural land per dollar remained more or less the same, but the price of agricultural land compared to Iranian rial, that's our national currency, started to rise, and people noticed that the safest bet for them and the most profiting one was agricultural lands. Agricultural land was not being used for farming anymore, and people were using for all possible ways, for loopholes in the regulations to change land use, but they were also looking for options that would allow them to change land use illegally even. And since there were hundreds of thousands of people that were doing this, the government could not deal with them. The government could not tackle this problem, because when you have 10,000, 20,000 people doing this, it becomes a national crisis. When you have 100,000 people doing this, it is a situation that you cannot do anything about it. Lawyers started exploiting regulations. They started teaching people ways to exploit them. And at the current moment, we have a crisis on our hands. Small parcels are on the rise, and non-farmers are buying agricultural lands at unprecedented rates, and we cannot prevent them from changing land use. Sometimes they change land use overnight. Sometimes they make buildings overnight. You look at
Mansouri, you have 2 minutes left. If we want to stay within the thing, please use your 2 minutes to extend your story, if that's possible still.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
At the moment, since we have a crisis in our hands, we are looking for legislative solutions, technical solutions that can help us tackle these problems. We are using for RS technologies, GIS-based technologies. We have tackled some of these problems, but legislative problems stay on our hands, and we can't deal with them because the parliament does not support the government, and the parliament is on the side of the people who have bought land, and they want to help them change land use, and the government wants to preserve agricultural land use. There is a conflict of interests in here, and of course we are looking for experience. I don't know if this kind of experience, this kind of crisis has happened to other countries, if other countries have similar experiences, but we are at the moment looking for experiences, for information on how we can tackle legislative problems, and international firms and establishments that can help us deal with this problem. I'm at your service.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Mansouri, also for your very honest and clear description of the problem that you find in Iran, where agricultural land, in fact, is eaten up for investment purposes. I understood that this was also part for the sanctions and the valuation of the US dollar, that they are looking for other investments, and that agricultural land is eventually a very nice target. We also noted that you asked for input from other experienced parties how to deal with such a problem. And that brings me immediately to the next speaker, Professor Rukuni. Professor Rukuni is a development analyst and strategist in several sectors, including agriculture and land reform and resettlement, rural development, and he is an advisor at the same time for the government of Zimbabwe and also the United Nations Development Programme and also the World Bank on issues that are relevant to land reform. I think we should be very happy that Professor Rukuni is willing to give his view, and if anybody has the knowledge and background to share his views on land reform, it would be, and then from the African perspective, it would be Professor Rukuni. Professor Rukuni, I would like to give you the floor. If in terms of time, we have in total, I think around 15 to, we have some more 15 minutes left. If you would take 8 to 10 minutes, then we would still have 5 minutes for Q&A before the session will stop. So I would like to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. I'll try to speed it up. So, I mean, it's estimated that anything close to 400 major reforms have taken place in more than 160 countries just in the last kind of 100 years or so. And here I've listed the usual issues that go into most of the land reforms. Some is to do with setting limits or ceilings of land holdings, some to expropriate land, sometimes compulsorily, or redistributing land that's expropriated. The restitution issue has been big in a number of places in Africa, especially South Africa. Consolidation of holdings is a big one internationally, but in Africa it's not a major one because there's too many rural people. But improving tenure security is a big one. And as I will point out later, it's because of the dual economy, dual society, European-based laws as opposed to African-based laws, we do have serious problems. Sometimes it's moving land from public to private hands and so on. So in Africa, I would say that, in fact, before I go to Africa, I had to kind of give the global scene so that we can contextualize everything. So I started with Latin America, where land reforms were pretty hot in the 60s. They still are, but the general experience is that most of the land reforms initially suffered failure, mainly because it was not easy to bring new ideas, such as collective type farming, with the traditional forms of agrarian engagement. So just as an example, scholars would say a lot of the land reforms then had insufficient planning, training, technical and financial support and so on. But today there's major improvements in the land reforms because most of them are out there to kind of strengthen the kind of traditional customary systems whilst modernizing at the same time so that they become part of the mainstream economy. So, well, just a generalization, but there it is. Then I took the BRICS countries because they are pretty interesting. They represent where most of the developing countries are trying to go. In Brazil, as an example, land reforms have been unable to resolve the dual economy conundrum. And Brazil, in spite of being able to manufacture almost anything, is still in a middle income trap forever. Russia, I think after Ukraine's story, I don't need to go into that one. India is the largest democracy in the world, but the small farmers there and the landless initially benefited a lot from land reforms and were empowered. As land was moved from the two part, both socially and economically. But today in India, there's some reversal of this. The middle class has grown so fast in India that they are now shifting their political landscape, wanting to see more kind of middle large players kind of dominating the economy. But there it is, but at least they got it. In China is the most successful in terms of converting land reforms into mass creation of a rural middle class, which in turn is able to sponsor the fastest growing manufacturing growth ever experienced in the history of industrialization. So this capacity, so most of the land reforms in Africa have a lot to learn from these examples here, because it is about a mass transformation of rural peoples into a middle class by rural standards, not by urban standards, connected to the manufacturing sectors and industry. South Africa, which is an African country, has had limited redistribution of land since the end of apartheid, because it's such a hardwired dual economy. It's so difficult to come up with an appropriate type of land redistribution without essentially just destroying the economy, whereas at the same time, the economy is not able to grow anymore because it is in a deep, deep middle income trap. I mean, South Africa is the largest industrial economy in Africa, but as an example, 57 million inhabitants in South Africa, and only 7 million pay tax. In fact, that number is going down. So you can see that without, they have attempted all manner of import substitution type reindustrialization, and they've all not yielded jobs. They still have to go back to some kind of agrarian solution. So that's kind of Latin America and the BRICS. Now coming to Africa, there's been lots of land reforms in Africa. Every one of the 55 countries has had to kind of undergo some kind of land reform. Today, the most important forms of land reform are to do with recognizing and kind of strengthening customary rights. And as I said earlier, this is a serious challenge in law, because in almost every African country at independence, you start off with a colonial or given law, and then it never really harmonizes with the customary laws, and that has massive issues. I'll come back to that when I conclude. Today also, there are a lot of African countries who believe that a lot of this land under customary tenure is underutilized, and a lot of governments have started amending their constitutions and laws and administrative procedures to be able to essentially alienate a lot more of that land for various local allocations to the local, if you want, business industrial class. But there's been a lot also that have been annexed for purposes of giving concessions to foreign investors in the form of the kind of large-scale land-based investments. The numbers, the amount of land that has gone into large-scale land-based investments as land reform varies, but it's considerable. It's probably in the region of 40 million hectares over the last 20 years. Land redistribution is big in Southern Africa and parts of East Africa, and currently big in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. Once again, as part of our colonial legacy, Zimbabwe went through a radical land reform program. It's a long story, but a very interesting one. In summary, 60% of the land went to small farmers who are actually doing a lot better. The 40% that went to the large middle is underutilized, and that's where most of the problems lie for the future. So if in conclusion, I then go through what I try to term here legal challenges with land reforms in Africa. First is this dual multiple legal jurisdictions, which almost every African country is either a dual legal jurisdiction or multiple, more than two. And almost invariably, none of the European type laws, because when the European laws were introduced by the colonial masters in Africa, some of them are already integrating or integrated. For instance, in South Africa, it's Roman Dutch law. So Roman and Dutch law has been integrated in South Africa all the way back over the last few hundred years. But the local African law was never integrated into the Roman Dutch law. So you have a dual system. And invariably, the world views of Africans on land and who owns land for what and how does it transfer hands. That's very different from the European one, because by the time the Europeans really colonized, they were already an industrialized society. So for them, land is much more of an economic good with other social benefits. Whereas for Africans, land is still everything. Even when they get what is called privately owned land, freehold land, title deed land, still for most Africans, it is a multi-purpose asset, economic, social, spiritual, and so on. So we had huge problems.
Mr. Mansouri, we have still 2 minutes left for your speech, if that's okay, and then we have 4 minutes left for Q&A. Is that acceptable?
Yes, the land holding ceiling imposition is a big challenge because of the valuation issue. South Africa is a typical example. So the value of land for the highly commercialized land is very high for the landowners, but for the rest of the population, they don't experience that value. It's kind of like an economic value. So the market values and economic values, there's a huge gap there. Compulsory acquisition has its huge problems I've already talked about. Consolidation is not a big issue in Africa, but the improvement of tenure security is by far the most important priority so far for the legal side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Rukuni. This is, I think, a very good and very broad overview of the different approaches that have been undertaken and the experiences. We now only have, I think, 4 minutes left before this session is to be concluded. Maybe I've seen a lot of questions in the chat all about the Ukrainian land reform and details that are already partly answered. What I would like to do is to go back to Mr. Mansouri's question and appeal to this conference with the question, and that's what I would like to pose to the speakers. Say how to avoid the use of agricultural land for speculation or for unsustainable development in this whole process of modernization. Could you give your opinion about this? This is probably an issue that is maybe in the broader sense applicable to many issues in other countries, in particular the sustainable way of developing agricultural land. But in Iran's situation, it's also a situation in which land is used for speculation. So you take it out of the system and use it for something else. The same you got in China for some time, that they took land away from agriculture to make it commercial, for commercial development, and then the price would increase enormously. Would you have any opinions about this and any suggestions? Maybe we start with Professor Rukuni, because you're still in the mood of your last session, and you might certainly have ideas because you compared so many jurisdictions. Yeah.
Well, my opinion is that value of agricultural land and how to maintain or improve it will differ depending on whether a country is a low-income country, a middle-income country, or a high-income country. In a low-income country like my own country, Zimbabwe, which is still largely an agrarian rural society, all land is agricultural land. So the idea that some is agricultural land, some is non-agricultural land only applies when you are now industrializing the economy and you are now specializing. And now those who go into large scale production can designate, we can start selecting what we now term agricultural land for the more developed countries. But I'm in consultation with our Ministry of Agriculture and local government in Zimbabwe as an example. And the colonials designated half the country social land, customary land for the tribal people. Then the other half is agricultural land. Today, as we speak, the majority of the people are still in the tribal land. So development can only happen because everywhere they are practicing agriculture, even in the dry areas. So at early stages of development, all land has to be developed as agricultural land, develop comparative advantage in the different territories. So I think for Ukraine, maybe even South Africa, it may be a bit different because but anyway, there you are.
Okay. Maybe Oleg Nivievsky, you have some suggestions. I can imagine that the Ukrainian government also had some worries on how to privatize or how to modernize the Ukrainian agricultural land without giving away agricultural land and without becoming an investment purpose only or a foreign investment purpose only, and how to make sure that it's done in a sustainable way. I think these were also issues that have been considered before the moratorium was lifted, isn't it?
Yeah, that was really highly debatable issue, and it was really a conflict. I mean, the public discussion conflict between those that proposed the draft law and those that opposed that, and you know, the access of foreigners, the access of investment funds. And you know, and then in the case of as a result of political discussions, we have that market at the moment restricted to basically to individuals and to small farmers, and then legal entities will have a chance to enter. So in this highly restricted market, for the moment, I mean, the individual farmers and all the farmers are benefiting, of course, but still, you know, in the areas where that border with urban areas, this transfer of land into the urban area is, well, it might be inevitable in any case, because, you know, the value of land there is quite substantial compared to the land that is located far from the city centers and from the megapolises. So how to, you know, preclude that? You know, the only so the measure that the current government is really focusing on is that support of the small farmers. So if the small farmers will be able to compete for the land, for that land with all kinds of agents that are working on that land, in that case, you know, the sustainability of land usage will be secured in a sense. Okay, so that's the current policy discussion we have right now.
Thank you, Oleg, for this. Then I would like to have 2 more minutes. One to make comments by Oleg Siemens, if you have any, and one by Mr. Mansouri, if you feel like you want to give a comment, but stay within 1 minute because we are already over the time. But I think we should share all our views from the panel in this subject. Maybe Oleg, you start.
Thank you. The topic which Mr. Mansouri has highlighted, like it's also valid for Ukraine, because what we see now that there are a lot of investment funds, like there are a lot of private also individuals are looking the ways how to go beyond the restrictions, like, and how to structure it correctly, because they see that now the price for the land is 1,000, like in 5 years it will be like 5,000, then it will be 10,000. But they are looking also, they want to buy the land, but they want also to lease the land to the farmer, like in order to secure also the revenues. I think that is very good point, which Mr. Mansouri highlighted, and Ukraine will be carefully, and Ukraine government will be carefully looking into it, that the opening of the market will not only go to the speculation, but will also the agriculture will benefit from it.
Okay, thank you, Oleg. Mr. Mansouri, you will have the last minute as speaker here.
Thank you. I would like to highlight a special case in Iran. Perhaps Iran in some aspects is very different from countries such as Ukraine or other countries. From a certain point of view, we have something that is both a curse and a blessing, and it's oil. So when you have oil, everything is affected by oil. You sell oil and the money goes to the people's pockets and you are saving money. But suddenly the sanctions kick in, as you noted before. We have the problem of the sanctions, and the money is losing its value. Suddenly it is losing value by hundreds of percents, and people get worried. In this case, what happens is it's not like land is today $1,000 and the next year it becomes $5,000. No, it's not like that. In our country, land today is 1,000 reals, and the next year it is 100,000 reals. And this is a very serious issue that I wanted to highlight, because perhaps the case is relatively different from other countries.
You bring in a whole different dynamic by raising the blessing and at the same time the curse of having oil, which makes the whole situation change. Well, I think we have to finish our session here. I think I'm very happy with all the contributions and the discussions we have had. At least I've learned a lot, and eventually the aim was to get feedback and food for further thought and discussion, maybe in the next conference. For now, I think we have to stop this session. We have 5 minutes of break, and then 4:10 Ukrainian time, Sarah Moya will introduce as the moderator session 2, which is about climate change, Green Deal, and sustainable development. I thank all the speakers so much for the contributions, and thank you participants for being in this session. Thank you. Bye-bye then.
My name is Sarah Moyo. We will now go to the second session of this conference after the first session, which was very informative. The second session is on climate change, Green Deal, sustainable development. And the topics here will include the benefits of sustainable development in agriculture and its impact on sustainable production and transportation, the impact of climate change on agriculture and food security, as well as the EU Green Deal. We have 3 speakers for this session. I will introduce each speaker and they will make their presentation for 8 to 10 minutes. Thereafter, questions will be conducted at the end of the whole session. The idea being that we want to give each speaker sufficient time to deliver their presentations. So I will introduce our first speaker of the day, of this session, and he is a gentleman called Ebi Dengu. Ebi is the managing consultant at Technology Development Services Africa. He has over 40 years of professional experience in agriculture, agribusiness, irrigation, food security, and rural and peri-urban households. He has experience in agroecological farming and climate change adaptation, working in government and development consultancy services. Ebi will speak on the challenges and opportunities of smallholder communities in transitioning to sustainable agriculture. Over to you, Ebi.
Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah has said, I'm based in Southern Africa, and I've worked mostly in the SADC area, and so we'll share my experience of working in smallholder communities. I decided to focus on challenges and opportunities of smallholders transitioning to smallholder countries to sustainable development, mainly because the benefits of sustainable development, I think, are well articulated in the major global strategic frameworks like the SDGs and the Africa Agenda 2063. So the SADC area, for those that are not familiar with it, 16 countries, about 345 million people, 200 million people still live in rural areas, and more than 90% of the farmers in SADC area are smallholder farmers that farm on less than 5 hectares and live mostly in under traditional tenure systems. It's still largely a food insecure region. For example, last year, about 45 million people were said to be reported to be food insecure, and therefore the topic is very relevant about sustainable agriculture. So some of the factors that are contributing to unsustainable development farming systems that lead to food insecurity are to do with things that were discussed in the earlier session: land and natural resource tenure insecurity, things that are not well defined, who owns what and who works what, and therefore create uncertain relationships between the people that work the land and the land itself and the natural resource base. Weak institutions at the local level, governance, land administration and governance institutions, poor innovation systems that are not supportive of the smallholder farmers and that are largely still focused on the large scale farmers, and poor input output markets that are not integrated sufficiently to support the smallholder farmers. This leads to low farming income, degraded natural resources, drought and floods and food insecurity, and all this is exacerbated by climate change and leading to unsustainable development situation in the smallholder sector, and therefore limited capacity to actually cope with the increasing pressure of climate change and other economic factors. And naturally, you then end up with poverty and conflict. I hope you can all hear me. Looking at it from a different angle, the smallholder sector, a very small percentage of the smallholder farmers are actually informal value chains, either in like plantation crops like sugarcane or tobacco, very limited range, and maybe another 20 or so percent produce a surplus for the market. But about 70% of the smallholder farmers across the region are largely subsistence and under traditional tenure system, and have insecure land and property rights. And they produce small surpluses for the market. They are generally food deficit, hence the large percentage of people that are reported to be food insecure. There's also market power imbalances between the large buyers and these smallholder farmers. Land is not sold within the smallholder or traditional tenure system. There are no formal land markets, although there is a thriving informal land markets, particularly around peri-urban areas. And the smallholder farmers are generally vulnerable to climate change, much more than the urban and the large-scale farmers. Yeah, the vulnerability due to climate change manifests itself as rainfall goes down, temperatures increase, and it's projected that 20 to 50% of the yields will go down, particularly for the staple cereals, maize in particular. Vulnerability to flooding, crop and livestock diseases like tuta, fall armyworm, all those things that are now starting to manifest themselves. Some of the things have been touched upon that continue to hold back the smallholder farmers. Policies and public resource allocation that favor centralized and extractive support models, like huge mechanization programs. As one of the review missions, you find 100 horsepower tractor parked by a smallholder farmer, homestead with just 2 or 3 hectares to, and that
Hello,
is not
Eddie.
efficient. Hello.
Yes,
Okay.
you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, fine. In terms of opportunities then to build capacity and relationships that help smallholder farmers cope with climate change, the issues about registering and securing the rights of smallholder farmers, supportive policies and public expenditure in innovative agroecological systems, nature-based innovations, particularly in water and renewable energy. Water and renewable energy are particularly critical for the smallholder farm, and I think for all of us, even in the urban areas. So there you are in supportive policies, accountable institutions, nature-based innovations, supporting agroecological farming systems. This way, we can create a relationship with the land base and improve the health of soils, increase biodiversity, stimulate local markets. Some of the successes that governments can build upon across the region. Conservation farming is being practiced. Some of the practices, I show some of the pictures there. Diversification into non crops, into bee farming, in water and renewable energy. This is solar powered water pumping systems that are really transforming communities. Okay, and the key challenge question is really, how can we catalyze collective action to transition to ecological farming and food systems without increasing the labor burden on smallholder farmers, especially for women and children? The going through the region, the agroecological success stories invariably increase the labor on the smallholder farmers, because they are labor intensive, they are knowledge intensive, they are a long-term commitment to working on your land and building up the quality of your land. I thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ebi, for an interesting presentation. I'm sure there'll be quite a few questions for you from the audience when the other speakers have completed their contributions. So now I will call upon Andreas van der Wees to give us his presentation. A brief introduction of Andreas. He's an agricultural lawyer with Contas, which is an accountancy and consultancy organization. His responsibilities include advising farmers on various agricultural matters, law matters, such as manure regulation, lease regulations, common agricultural policy. He also drafts and assesses legal contracts, including wind and solar parks on farming properties. He is a board member of the Dutch Association for Agricultural Law and editor of a magazine in the agricultural sector. Andreas will speak to the EU Green Deal and the new Common Agricultural Policy for the period 2023 to 2027. Over to you, Andreas.
Thank you, Sarah. First of all, I would like to share my screen. Can you see the screen, Sarah?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, thank you. Well, here to introduce about myself, but you already did, so I'm going to the next slide. First of all, I would like to tell something about Dutch agriculture. The total size of land available for agriculture in the Netherlands is 1.8 million hectares. It will not surprise you that in a small populated country as the Netherlands, this number of agricultural land the last years is declining for housing, nature, and generating sustainable energy. An average farm, dairy farm in the Netherlands has what about 105 dairy cows, exclusive young stock, and what about 60 hectares of land. The average arable farm is has around 60 hectares of land, and the most important arable crops are grains, potatoes, sugar beets, and of course vegetables. The average price of a hectare agricultural land in 2021 is a bit more than 60,000 euros. For years, the number of companies in agriculture has been decreasing, and at the same time, the average size of the company is growing. Well, the future of agriculture in Holland is at this right moment in our politics and society a hot topic. The challenges for the Dutch agriculture at this moment are minimize nitrogen's deposition on Natura 2000, improving biodiversity, water quality, improving soil health and organic matter, and reducing plant protection products. Well, then the Common Agriculture Policy, the new CAP has a purpose to be a key tool in reaching the ambitions of the farm to fork and biodiversity strategy, and also the EU Green Deal targets. Well, the new CAP has a strong emphasis on results and performance and less on direct or basic payments. The future CAP will reward farmers that choose to go one step further in terms of environmental care and climate action. Each EU country has to design a national strategic plan. And when designing these plans, the EU countries will contribute to the 9 specific objectives through a toolbox of broad policy measures, which can be shaped and around national needs and capabilities. And that means that the EU countries have freedom to develop measures that are in line with agricultural practices in their country or area. So it means there's not only one generic EU policy. In the current CAP, we know the basic payments and optional the green payments for agriculture practices. The 3 greening obligations are crop diversification, permanent grasslands, and at least 5% of ecological focus area. In the future CAP, the requirements for the green payments are included to receive the basic payments, and at least 25% of the budget for direct payments will be allocated to the eco schemes, providing stronger incentives for climate and environmental friendly farming practices and approaches. It's important to know that these eco schemes, it is an optional measure that cannot be imposed from above. Well, the eco scheme replaces the green payments. Examples of the eco schemes are organic farming, agroforestry, land laying fallow, don't plow, flower strips, margin strips, and high diversity grasslands. EU countries may apply up to 85 reduction for amounts exceeding 60,000 euros for the basic income support receiving on one single farm. They may also impose an upper limit, we call it capping, on the amount received at 100,000 euros, again received by one only single farm. Reduction or capping is optional. The Dutch Minister of Agriculture argued for an obligation for reduction or capping in all EU countries. Well, that's isn't done. So my expectation for the Netherlands is that this voluntary option will be used in the Netherlands, and it's fair, in my opinion, to support in particular the small farmers. So some conclusions about the new CAP, which will go in 2023. The future CAP will reward farmers to choose one step further. The measures in the EU countries can be different, but there also can be a different measure in regions in one EU country. And to make it attractive to farmers to participate, the measures must be in line with the local situation. There is a risk that farmers will not participate in the eco schemes. My expectation is that most of them will participate. Years ago, we had the same discussion about the green payments, and the most of them participate. Well, in the Netherlands, there is a discussion if the new CAP is ambitious enough. If you look at, for example, the EU Green Deal, well, there's something to be said for both sides, I think. With the challenges for the Dutch farmers in mind, I think this new CAP is a good step forward to boost the transition. And my expectation is, as I told before, that the voluntary option to introduce a capping or a reduction is fair and will be used in the Netherlands. At the same time, you cannot expect agriculture to be able to achieve the transition in a very short period of time. if you look, for example, to the average income of a farmer, to end my presentation, in the Netherlands, we always say the city of Rome was not built in one day, and I think Kiev was neither. So you have to take time for the transition. Well, this is the end of my presentation, Sarah.
Right. So you just need to stop sharing the screen.
I will.
All right. Thank you very much, Andreas. That was a nice, precise presentation, and you kept to the allocated time. Thank you very much. So now we will go to our third speaker, Nazar Obotsky. I hope I pronounced his surname correctly. Let me just pick up my notes on his, so that I can introduce him to everyone. Nazar is the director of the Brussels office of the Ukrainian Business and Trade Association. As head of the Brussels office of the Trade Association, he is responsible for business networking and interest intermediation for its members at EU institutions and the European industry and business associations looking to develop investment and trade with Ukraine. His office is tasked with daily monitoring of the EU laws and regulations to signal prospective disadvantages or opportunities for Ukrainian exporters. Nazar will provide a brief overview of the key elements of the EU-European Green Deal initiative from the perspective of the Ukrainian business community, particularly Ukrainian agriculture, export-oriented business. Over to you, Nazar.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, everyone, for this opportunity to speak up. Thank you also for the introduction. Indeed, I will share with you, let's say, the messages and the views of the Ukrainian agricultural producers. Specifically, it's the most active export-oriented segment with regards to European or EU policy, agriculture policy that reflects the green agenda and decarbonization agenda. And I will not put up a presentation like the previous speaker did. In fact, the presentation of Andreas was very illustrative. I'll try to build up on this and simply will highlight a few key elements which are of relevance, if not of concern, to Ukrainian producers, agricultural producers, exporters. But I might suspect that they are also of concern and of relevance to agricultural producers and exporters around the world who target the EU market, whose trade with the EU depends and reinforces the economic durability and livability of their neighborhoods, their communities and economies at large. So, as Andreas rightly outlined in his presentation, the Common Agricultural Policy of the EU, a major monumental program of financial support to the EU agriculture sector, is increasingly being linked up with environmental and climate agenda to limit greenhouse emissions from the agricultural and agriculture-related export. And to a large extent, it is achieved in two ways, in two tracks. One is, of course, the CAP, the massive subsidization program that European agriculture traditionally benefits from the EU budget. But also another important pillar of this undertaking is so-called from farm to fork policy. We call it 2F strategy, from farm to fork strategy. That strategy has been recently revisited in the framework of the European Green Deal initiative to ensure that European agriculture limits greenhouse gas emissions through a variety of ways, ranging from agriculture, from organic agriculture, and with more sustainable use of plant protection products, antimicrobial substances for husbandry, and so on and so forth. From the outside, the key elements of the 2F strategy, we believe, may bring disruption rather than support to availability of trade in agriculture, international trade in agriculture, and most importantly, with trade with the EU as one of the key global markets for agriculture across the world for international producers. And there are at least three elements of concern within the 2F strategy that, for instance, are on the radar screen of the Ukrainian producers. And I'm sure they will ring a bell also with producers from across the world, from Africa to Asia and Latin America. Once and foremost is the key element of the 2F strategy is to reduce by 50% the use of plant protection products, chiefly pesticides, by 2030. Also, the same objective is applied to the use of veterinary medicinal products. Particularly, the important element is antimicrobial antibiotics products that are used in husbandry and meat processing industry. The 2F strategy targets antimicrobial resistance problem and is aiming to lower also by approximately 50% the use of antibiotics in meat, live animals industry by 2030. There is another rift of packages or measures envisaged by the 2F strategy. They're mostly in the area of minimization of deforestation in the agricultural supply chains, meaning in practical terms that, for instance, when feedstock, when agricultural production for feedstock, animal feed is targeted, then certain legislative requirements will be introduced to ensure that a particular supply chain for animal feed is constructed in such a way that deforestation is avoided or minimized. Another very important innovation in the 2F strategy is so-called nutrition labeling. Nutrition labeling, which will identify on the products, agricultural products, specifically meat or plant produced products, its values from the sustainability point of view and consumer health point of view. In fact, I would like to recall the principles of the EU internal market as far as the non-tariff regulation is concerned. Usually, when an internal regulation of the agricultural production and food safety is concerned in the EU, and when it is applied across the internal market towards European producers, it is usually matched by the same stringent requirements towards exporters from third countries to ensure that there is so-called level playing field between the European producers, specifically in agriculture, and their international peers and other competitors. So in that sense, Ukrainian agriculture exporter industry sees that the 2F strategy will inevitably result in additional trade barriers, either in the form of more strict demands towards so-called MRLs, it's maximal residue level for plant protection products or pesticides, for instance, in plant-based foodstuffs. The same applies to the maximal residue levels for antibiotics in animal-based, meat-based products. And also the same very stringent requirements would apply, for instance, for imports of animal feed in terms of certification of reforestation or preservation of forests. Once again, on a face value, these inevitable non-tariff restrictions applicable to export products from third countries may be accepted from the point of view, let's say, if we look at WTO rules, from the point of view of preserving the environment, ensuring the level playing field, also on an internal market for European and international producers. But when we look at the massive financial firepower of common agricultural policy, we see that, in fact, the level playing field is no longer level, but it's rather very much distorted in favor of European producers. So in practical terms, Ukraine as a neighbor and a trade partner of the EU raises its concern about the approaches taken in the 2F strategy, from farm to farm strategy, and how it's being reinforced by the new CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, in the framework of the European Green Deal. And in terms of policy, we are trying to address this problem in two ways. First and foremost, the business approach supports the government plans to align legislatively Ukrainian agricultural legislation in order to keep the same level playing field for domestic producers as compared with European ones. But at the same time, we negotiate and insist that certain exemptions or transition periods should be applied to Ukrainian farmers to take into account their very peculiar domestic production conditions. The historical statistics and applications of pesticides, other plant protection products, fertilizers, etc., which historically are very different levels of intensity. And this is just one example.
Hello,
I think I will
Nazar?
stop here. I will stop here and be
Nazar?
happy to take questions. Yes.
Oh, all right. No, thank you very much.
So I was on time, I suppose.
Yes, yes, you're very much on time. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you very much. All right, so I will now open this section to questions from the audience. One can either post questions to the chat or Q&A, or alternatively, I think there should be a facility for even participants to ask the presenters directly. I think there should be an opportunity for them perhaps to raise their hand, and I think they will then be unmuted and they can ask their questions directly to the speakers. I'm just having a look at the chat to see if there are any questions there. And in the Q&A, no, there don't appear to be any questions there. Maybe in the meantime, whilst people are thinking of what they would like to ask our presenters, maybe I can ask AB. AB, with regards to your presentation, I heard you say that obviously a lot needs to be done to improve the issues of renewable energy and water availability, the provision of water for rural farmers. What would you say is the biggest challenge with the current business model in Southern Africa with regards to promoting and encouraging African farmers to adopt climate-friendly farming practices? Obviously as an expert in your field, you are aware that climate change will result in more areas in Africa becoming arid. So how can small-scale farmers be encouraged to change the crops that they are farming, and which will give them a better return, considering the impact that climate change is having in the region?
Thank you, Sarah. I think the first thing is for the decision makers to change their frame of mind and to have smallholder farmers in mind when they make their decision. I mean, when you put up large water reservoirs, huge water reservoirs, and then after a couple of years you say, you know, we have lots of water, what do we do with the water? How can we help smallholder farmers? The whole frame of decision making should actually start from those smallholder farmers. How can we best work with smallholder farmers and assist them increase their productivity. So that's one area, because you need catchment management of these catchment areas, so that the water reservoirs are not silted up in a short time and you lose the massive investment put in. So there's one harvesting water in large reservoirs, but also the most critical thing is for each household or each smallholder to harvest as much of the water that fall on their property, to plant water, as it were, so that they don't allow runoff, because we have very little rain. We are in semi-arid areas, so we need all the water that we can master. So innovations that allow farmers to harvest as much of the water as possible on their land, and then to promote crop diversification, that will improve the health of the soils, that will improve the microbial life of the soils that we are using. So water investment and renewable energy, because that's one resource that we have in abundance, the sunlight. So if we can harvest that and have that technology affordable and more widespread for use by smallholders, that will go a long way in transforming these landscapes that smallholders work at, and actually secure their food security and improve the quality of their lives. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ebi. And then perhaps I can pose a question to Andreas. Andreas, in your presentation, you mentioned that part of the Common Agricultural Policy is that farmers will be encouraged to adopt farmer-friendly practices by implementing eco schemes, but that these eco schemes will be voluntary. Now, in view of the fact that the EU has an ambition of becoming climate neutral territory, how will this be implemented if the farmers are at liberty to adopt or not adopt climate-friendly practices?
Yeah, well, I think you can't change the agriculture in just one day. Yeah? The transition, it is a process. Farmers are part of the whole system and do have obligations to, for example, the bank. Income support is also one of the remains of the goals of the CAP. So now the eco schemes are volunteer, and farmers who want to take a step further will get reward if they participate. But I think that in the future, some measures will be mandatory to receive in the future the basic income or direct payments. That will be a process, yes.
All right, thank you. Let me see again if there are any questions in the chat. Maybe I'm not looking at it correctly.
I don't see questions either.
Yeah, all right, okay, no, that's fine. Okay, again, so whilst we are waiting for questions, maybe I can ask Nazar. Nazar, you had an interesting presentation about how the Ukraine considers the EU Green Deal, and following on from Andrea's answer to my question about, whether or not what the impact of voluntary adoption of ecosystems or eco schemes will be. You spoke about nutrition labeling on agricultural products. Do you feel that the refusal or the slow adoption of eco schemes by farmers in the EU may result perhaps in consumers boycotting their goods, or supermarket chains not buying from farmers perhaps who are not adopting eco schemes? Because obviously with the whole world now being aware of the risks and the impact of climate change, and there being a lot more consumer activity and awareness, you know, by the general citizenry about the impact, the environment. Do you see a slow adoption by farmers impacting their ability to market their products?
Thank you for your question, Sarah. It's a very good question, and I would answer it in the following way. First and foremost, the reluctance of European farmers to adopt eco schemes, which is one of the objectives of the CAP, and the CAP financial stimulus is directed at this, is that it constitutes considerable upfront costs in terms of production and in terms of reorganizing your business models, which the farmers apparently do not feel are sufficiently covered by the financial incentives of the CAP. That's one thing. Another thing is that you refer to consumer activism through the retail chain system, which may compel, let's say, agricultural producers to move in the right direction. That may be the case, but when we talk about at the macro level, still the price and the price and quality price ratio, in my humble opinion, reigns supreme, and the vast majority of consumers are still not yet at the level whereby they would prefer environmental awareness towards price quality considerations. This situation may be aggravated in the near future following increasingly large rates of crop failures or crop insufficiencies due to the climate change. Food security will come in the way. Food security considerations may trump this additional, let's say, trends. And Europe, for instance, may face a very difficult choice, which side to choose, ensuring food security and as a result to compromise on sustainability and environmental standards for foodstuffs, or rather keep the old course. And as far as the international producers are concerned, the nutrition labeling in very often represents an additional administrative barrier to trade. And while European producers are better protected and, let's say, offset through financial incentives, international producers are not. So that this additional barrier to trade may be sometimes significant to comply with.
Sarah, can I say something?
Yes, you may, Andreas.
Yes, you asked if we see the possibility that consumers will boycott the products. What we see in the Netherlands, that there is a group of people who together buy some land and lease them to farmers who farm under climate and environmental friendly farming practices. So they are not boycotting in the supermarket the product, but they start at the beginning and buy some land and say to that farmer, you can only lease this land if you farm organic or without chemical products. So that is what we see in the Netherlands.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, let me see. I think there was a question in the chat. I will just read it out, and then perhaps maybe Nazar or Andreas can answer. I don't know if the question is, in Europe at least, there is a conflict situation between agricultural land use and implementation of renewable energies, that is solar plants and wind farms, in order to fulfill the aims of the EU Green Deal. This situation may lead and leads to the need of expropriation of farmland to have sufficient surface for renewable energies. Do you see any effect of such development on the encouragement and intentions of farmers to adopt climate neutral practices? So I will ask both Nazar and Andreas to answer that question. It is in the chat as well.
Yes, well, I saw the question. Good question. Well, I think this is in the Netherlands hot topic. There is a fight for land, for housing, for nature, for agriculture, and renewable energy. So this is a hot topic right now in Holland.
All right, and Nazar?
I think there is, yes, I think there is another question that may be directed specifically to me. It was the previous one. I'll read it out loud. Are there any subsidies for Ukraine by international banks such as EBRD for agricultural land or for farmers or farming entities implementing eco schemes where farmers outside the EU receive more subsidy than EU farmers? Well, the answer is very simple, no. That's the problem, that there is a huge disbalance in terms of financial power available to the European producers as opposed to their international non-EU competitors. I can give you a very good example. In the pre-COVID era, the total amount of agricultural subsidies awarded to the Ukrainian agricultural sector in 2019 was 30 million euros. As opposed to, I don't know how much, but probably it was tens of billions of euros per year, of common agricultural policy available to farmers across the EU. I may be wrong with regards to the numbers. It may be even in hundreds of billions of euros. So in fact, such subsidies are not available, especially by the IFOs, international financial institutions. We are very much proud that the Ukrainian agricultural sector was able to develop and become competitive virtually without any financial help outside. However, what is valuable from the part of EBRD and other international financial institutions is their training programs, knowledge transfer programs, and their advisory services backed by technical assistance to modernize the agricultural technical regulations and agricultural legislation, for instance, in terms of so-called cadastre, the land market reform, the way land is registered and serves as a transparent commodity in the upcoming land market reform. It has been discussed in the previous section by the speakers. That help was available, but otherwise, Ukraine, like in many other countries in the Middle East or maybe in Africa, was on its own trying to be competitive in terms of agriculture on international markets. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think we still have a bit of time. Maybe Titania can correct me if I'm wrong. I think we might still have about 10 minutes. So maybe I will ask Ebi. Ebi, in Africa, do you believe that our governments are doing enough to build capacity in relationship to assisting communities to cope with climate change and to work in harmony with land and natural resources? Is there enough being done in Africa?
I think there's a lot of emphasis in the global frameworks and national frameworks, but on the ground, you get a sense of keeping people busy but poor, that's what you get on the ground. So I think the frameworks are there, but putting things into practice and prioritizing resource allocation to support climate change adaptation, building the resilience of smallholder communities, right from the smallholder household to the next level, like for example, in Zimbabwe, it will be the village, and then getting on to the traditional authority, and then the district level, strengthening those institutions and defining, you know, that land registration of so that each smallholder knows what is theirs. Because if you are going to have a long-term investment, it's been referred to. Long-term investment also requires a security of tenure. You're not going to invest in improving your land unless you know that you can transfer that land to your children, and they can in turn transfer. Because you're looking at a long-term commitment to your land, to improving your land and the productivity of your land. That is where I think it's missing. At the moment, it's still very much an extractive model. If I give the example of the Grain Marketing Board, which is the most significant player in the smallholder sector, it does not talk about building business hubs or agribusiness hubs within these communities. It talks about, we're developing collection points to collect grain, not to develop business relationships with the farmers. So there is need for a mind shift in our decision makers, as it were. But I had a question for Ukraine. I saw that as Zimbabwe can learn, or Southern Africa can learn quite a bit. They have a significant chunk of land under smallholders that have 2 to 3 hectare holdings. So understanding their tenure system and the business models that support those farmers that hold about 16 million hectares. With an average of 2 to 3 hectares. I don't know whether there's still somebody who can just expand on that a little bit. Nazar, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure whether I understood your question well, Abby, but I would say that the structure of agricultural holdings in Ukraine is a little bit more varied. We have from the one hand, large agricultural vertically integrated companies that possess considerable land banks, I mean, holdings of land that allow them to organize large-scale efficient agriculture. We also have medium-sized farmer farms. Usually it's tens of hectares, no more than 50 hectares, that also engage either in commercial farming, mostly cereals, mostly vegetable oils, less often husbandry, dairy farms, while availability of small-scale agriculture in Ukraine is relatively much less prominent. Everything has to do with the long delays with liberalization of land market. And as a result, the land officially remained under state ownership or ownership of municipal authorities until the last 2 years. Then under this system, lease schemes of leasing land proliferated, with the result that large agricultural holdings were able to effectively control very large land parcels, resources, in order to organize their business effectively. So Things may change once the land market reform has been launched, although it has been piecemeal. It was not particularly efficient. And there are different forecasts how it may develop in Ukraine. One says that if land market reform will continue in a more liberalized way, we should expect a certain redistribution of land, with the result that large-scale agricultural production will be even more dominant, followed by medium-sized farming. But small plots are not economically viable, and it's very likely that the small plots owners will sell their stakes, considering also that commercial price for land as a result of liberalization will rise, and it will become commercially, how to say, lucrative for farmers to cash in and to move somewhere else. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Nazar. I'm seeing that we just have 3 minutes left. I don't know if any of our presenters would like to say anything, maybe in conclusion, just to wind up. Maybe I can start with you, Andreas. Is there anything that you feel that you would have wanted to say in your presentation, which you didn't get a chance to?
No, thanks.
All right, and Ebi?
Just to say, when we talk about increasing productivity, we are talking about, tons per hectare. But I've also seen that going around labor productivity, the schemes that are ecologically sound and that will bring about sustainable development are actually labor intensive. And it's usually the women and children that bear the burden. And one would like to look at innovations that reduce that burden and increase the productivity of labor. So that's an area, a challenge for sort of the innovation systems that are in place.
Right, thank you. And Nazar, anything else in conclusion? No. All right, so I think it just gives me then to say thank you very, very much to the speakers for this session. It was a very interesting session. You kept to the time and you participated fully in answering the questions that were posed in the session. And I've very much enjoyed moderating this session. So now to our conference participants, we are going to have a 10-minute break. And then after that, we will have the third session, which will be on technology, agriculture, and trade. And and so Titania, I think, will alert us when that session is about to start. So thank you very much, everyone.
Sonke, I can see you. Okay, I can. It seems everyone's here. My name is Ivan Kasenyuk. Along with Sonke Lut, we have an honor to moderate this session. From my perspective, it's one of the most interesting session because we have great speakers and we have quite interesting topics, very in line with development and technologies and trade, modern trade. Today we will have 3 speakers. Let me introduce them. We have Jens Karsten. Jens, you are with us. Hello. I would like to introduce Jens. He's EU cooperation partner at KWG Legal. His main basically activity is concentrated mainly in food and farm law. Jens also is attorney at BXL Law and admitted to the bar at Cologne and Brussels. Also, it's worth noting that he acts as a legal advisor to European Commission, used to be legal advisor to European Commission, and to the Directorate General Health and Consumer Protection within the EC, and also his research and teaching at the Université Catholique de Leuven in Belgium and in Brazilian Universidade Federal de Rio Grande. So the topic of Jens is export in food to the EU, market access, paperwork, quality requirements. I think that Jens will partly concentrate on GMO issues. I think it's also an important aspect. Sonke and myself will ask a few questions to Jens with respect to his topic. Also, I would like to introduce the second speaker of our session is Dr. Lukesh Nicheti. I don't know whether, yes, you're with us. Hello. Also, Dr. Lukeshny is quite a remarkable speaker. She's a general manager at Sansor, which is based in South Africa. Lukesh Nicheti is also a Bachelor of Science in Genetics in Biochemistry. I think that Dr. Lukeshny has quite an academic approach to her topic, and she will try to give us understanding of GMO regulation within the South Africa, as well as will give us a global approach to this topic. Also, I would like to note that she made quite remarkable projects previously. She managed national and international scientist research program between South Africa and Norway. And actually, this project was the largest biosafety research project globally. We also will have a few questions to Dr. Lukeshny, and I think we will speak on GMO, and that's quite interesting. The last speaker of our session is Edona Vila from Canada, and as you see, we have quite a broad seat of our speakers from European Union, from South Africa, and from the Canada. And Donna Vila from Canada, she's a partner at Toronto office of Borden, Ledner, and Gervis LLP. She works at basically largest national law firm. And Donna's practice is focused on product liability, and specifically in respect of Internet of Things and emerging classes of connected products. So basically, the main focus of Donna Vila is technology and the law. And which regulates these technologies. So, so for your understanding, this includes connected and autonomous vehicles, connected medical devices, smart machinery applications in agriculture. The key focus of the presentation of Edona is liability framework associated with the smart agri-tech, and she will focus her discussion on the regulatory landscape impacting deployment of agri-tech solutions. As well, we will have a few questions for Edona Vila, and I think that we may start if there are no questions. I think we'll start with Jens, and we'll have a few questions for Jens in respect of his topic of exporting food to the EU, market access, paperwork, and quality requirements. In this respect, I would like to pass the word to the moderator of our session, Sonke Lund, and I think he also have a few words to say and to continue the speech. Sonke, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ivan, for this complete introduction of the speakers and of the topic. I have nothing, very little to say more to this, including to this topic. or to our session, I think we should start immediately because we have a little time. I agree with you that we have a very broad topic in our session, which refers to the topics itself as to the geographical or geography of our session. And so let's start first of all with Jens Karsten. We talked about your session, your participation here before, and your participation is very much Brussels orientated. And so my first question to you, Jens, is what's new in Brussels that concerns agri-food trade, or what's coming up?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this seminar, and I'm pleased to say a few words about trade issues focusing on EU trade, EU imports. There's much to say about this, and I guess that most of the participants here are very familiar with the topics I will come across. When we speak about Ukraine in particular in its relationship to Europe, well, Europe has a large number, a significant number of free trade agreements negotiated or on the way of negotiation with Ukraine. Since 2014, there is an association agreement that is already well in place and workable. This is a deep and comprehensive, free trade. The Ukrainian colleagues here on the conference will certainly know much about this. They have experience of their work in food law and in farm law with the implementation and the transposition of a large number of the European acquis communautaire, the body of law of Europe. Yes, it's not actually that I want to dive into this in particular, but say more some general words. I was invited to say, what's new in Brussels. What's new in Brussels actually, and this just came up yesterday. That might be interesting for many here, and is not perhaps disseminated everywhere. The EU has proposed a new legal act on the General Scheme of Preferences, GSP. GSP is of relevance not just for Ukraine, but for I guess for many other countries actually than our Eastern European partners. This is something, the GSP is something that interests many economies that have trade interests with the EU, including, of course, food standards. Now, what I'll try to do is, if the system allows me to do that, is to share my screen, because I have prepared at the last minute a slide presentation that I have sent, but is not. I just have a technical problem here to upload this, which I regret. Can you see this now?
No.
No. This is regrettable.
Yes, we don't. Unfortunately, we don't see.
You don't see it.
Maybe I will try to share this. I don't know whether this will be possible. At least
that would be helpful. I mean, I can certainly sustain a speech here, or my presentation, or the answers to your questions without this presentation. I regret this, but otherwise, I just start with my little. Oh, well, very well, excellent. Thank you.
I can help you, Jens. Yeah. So you just tell me if I need to click.
This was my opening slide. The next slide would be helpful to have. Yes, very well. What's new in Brussels about agri-food trade? I have just 10-15 minutes, so I will rush us through 20 slides. That should, however, I should say that, I mean, this is the sort of the background material that I hope to share with the participants of this call for reference also after this presentation. So for those who do trade, they know or they have heard about the official controls regulation that already is in force since December 2019. A massive body of law with underpinning regulations that regulate official controls in the food chain, but also foreign trade. What is, however, really significant that happened this year is the coming into force of a law that you find perhaps not so relevant, the animal health law on the 21st of April this year. However, around the coming into force of this law, a really large number of measures came into force on that date that really keeps everybody busy who is active in the area. We speak about paperwork later, but this is we just go through the body of law because it is, I think, important to be aware of the size and breadth and width of it. So if I can have the next slide, please. So you will know about positive lists of countries exporting food into the EU, mainly of animal origin. There are two laws here that are relevant, in particular relevant or of general application. There is the recognition by the animal health law through this regulation 2021-2004, and the recognition by the official controls regulation 2021-405. We of course don't get into the law, but this is important to have that on record. What also is important is to have residual monitor plans. This is the regulation 2021-653. You see all these laws adopted this year and actually coming into force on the 21st of April. The next slide already, thank you. There is the information management system for official controls and the system components, IMSOC. In this slide presentation, there are links that I have to update, but there are links that will be available for those who consult this document after. We have here, the relevant regulation that is sort of summarizing the paperwork, ADIS, Eurofood, and of course traces that you will have come across as well. There are model certificates, implementing acts, implementing Act Food, implementing Act Aqua, implementing Act Terre, that contain model certificates. If I can have the next slide, please. Excellent. So we just, again, this is more for the record. We have the implementing Act Food. This is this regulation with this lengthy title. Next slide, please. There is EA Aqua, which is about fisheries, and agriculture, EA Terre for animals and so on. Thank you. We are rushing here.
No, yeah, it's just I see that you're quite fast.
No. Okay. No, I don't. I will respect. I don't want to eat into the time of the other speakers.
No.
Import requirements. Yes, here we have.
That's a bit my point. Again, sorry that I interrupt here. Perhaps we can jump to the next question, because I'm a bit afraid that we are just to go over the time, and your presentation is quite exhaustive and well, it's very complete. But I think let's go to the next question then, which is as we all know and we see it from your presentation, there's a lot of paperwork exporters have to deal with when it comes to export foodstuff to the EU. And can you give us a very short or brief introduction about this kind of paperwork importers or exporters have to fulfill when they want to deal with the EU?
Yeah, thank you. If I can have slide 10, please. Right. So you all heard about sanitary and phytosanitary measures and the different product categories for which different paperwork is applicable. We can go to slide 11. This is also sort of the just the buzzwords that people need to know when they when they're sort of tackling an export issue, the CHET, the Common Health Entry documents, organized by the TRACES system. The TRACES system is now completely electronical. That the link is included here. Can we have slide 12, please? The next one. Yes, this is sort of an attempt of mine to put in a glossary together of the relevant paperwork that people need to be aware of. Most of this is reformed by the acts that entered into force on the 21st of April. Transposition periods expire on the 20th of October. This is again sort of for the record. And if I can have the next slide, please, then I'm finished with this question. This is also an attempt to give an overview of the requirements of the paperwork adapted to the product categories. I stop here.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, so we also have, Jens, for you a few also questions. I would say two more that we discussed previously in the course of preparation. So as soon as we also have Dr. Lukeshny, who will speak on GMO issues and the global approach, and as well as South Africa, it's quite interesting to find out what are the developments, what's happening in EU without these GMO regulations and new techniques that you have. So that's also quite interesting.
If we can jump to the last slide, slide 20. The message I actually have here, and knowing that we have another competent speaker here about GMO and new breeding techniques, the really big issue this year is the debate about the new genomic techniques. There was an ECJ judgment in the EBA we discussed in the summer last year. We had a very interesting seminar about this, where I was invited also, to speak namely about this judgment and the implications of it. That took a rather large view of GMO regulation, of the scope of GMO regulations. I'm happy also with the participants to share this document, which is 1 year old, with them. But really the news here is that we have a debate now stimulated by the European Commission on new genomic techniques that might lead to a new approach. This is a major problem for exporters into the EU to comply with these requirements. I leave it there, knowing that another speaker is competently speaking of that.
Thank you, Jens. And probably the last question for you is the future. So what is the future of organic food, GMO, and what will change in the coming years? Can you give us a bit of flavor of that?
Oh, about a prediction about the future of the GMO regulation, I don't dare to do here. It's highly political in Europe. It's complicated to move forward as in many areas of innovative food. With organics, that's a bit different. That's sort of the other sort of end of the spectrum, the more naturally produced food. There we have an interesting, a big change coming with the 1st of January next year. A new framework law will kick into force on organics generally, including the import requirements and the trade relationship on inorganics with third countries, Ukraine and others. I make reference, to cut a long story short here, to the slide presentation where I also extensively listed the relevant laws for participants to consult.
Okay. May I ask you one question, Jens, regarding the organic food? Because in the previous session, and I'm sure you listened to it, we were talking about the climate change issue and the question of organic food, which is not always related, but somehow it is. Can you foresee that there will be a consideration in this new regulation which comes into force the next year, or is it just a kind of certification issue, or is it really a policy change which is going on regarding organic food?
Well, the Commission, as the main policymaker here in Europe, in this respect, is pushing organic food very, very much. Actually, today, Today they called the 23rd of September the Organics Day, the European Organics Day, that went over the news ticker today. Quite interesting. Well, this is the political sort of sounds around a broader development, indeed, that wants to enlarge for instance, the agricultural surface that is farmed organically significantly over the coming years. This is part of the larger policy framework, Farm to Fork, and the greening of the food chain. There are many developments here that are relevant to this. Actually, also today we have the UN Food Summit that will also inform us about the sustainability push in food production. About this regulation, I would say I would be a bit more modest. It is basically reorganizing the organics sector for Europe, including its external trade relationship. It needs to be dealt with. It needs to be understood and applied. And what is clearly a message here for the trading partners of the European Union, the organics market is growing, and it was well, probably the fastest growing food market in Europe, with double-digit growth over the last 10 years. That is significant. So if countries like Ukraine and also others are able to produce organic food, certify it, and do the paperwork that is necessary and that I tried to sketch in the slide presentation. If they are able to do this, they have certainly export possibilities, opportunities, and given that it's an upmarket product for which better prices can be achieved, an attractive export option. And then, yeah, it is important to understand what Europe requires, because the ambition is really to have equal standards for European and imported organic food, and that can be, yeah, ambitious.
That could be a challenge, and I think on one hand it's a good news, and the other hand, the challenge for importers could be perhaps a bit high, but it's a very interesting market in Europe, as consumers are very much conscious about the situation and prefer more and more organic food. So that's linked then to the next speaker, to Dr. Lukashny Chetty, which will talk about the GMO. I don't know whether we have her here. Lukashny, I can't see you right now.
I'm here. Good afternoon, Sanka. Good
Lukashny?
afternoon.
How are you?
I am well, thank you.
Lukashny, thank you very much to attend with us the session as a speaker and a panelist, and to share your extensive knowledge about GMOs. We had the opportunity to discuss this with you before, and it was really a very interesting discussion, and it would be good to continue this discussion for a long time, but only we have now 15 minutes, so we will start immediately with the questions that we have for you.
Okay.
And Lukashny, knowing what we know now after 20 years of GMO cultivation, what you do differently for GMO regulations?
Sanka, do you want me to start my presentation and then get to your question?
How it is more comfortable with you, or to deal with the question with the presentation,
yeah,
as you like.
I'd like to just to set the scene a little bit. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen, Sanka?
Yes, we can.
Is it in full mode?
No, it is not. Now. Okay.
Okay, so thank you everyone for having me here to talk about the regulation of GMOs. Just to put in context why I'm here, I'm a scientist. I think I'm probably the only scientist in the session, so hopefully don't stand out too much here. I'd like to fit in a little bit. And I represent the South African seed industry, so companies that work with GMOs on a daily basis. Just to refresh everyone's memory, to talk about what is a GMO. Before GMOs, we had conventional breeding. We had a variety that wanted a specific trait, such as virus-resistant plant with a high yield crop. We want one plant that can give us both things. We cross it over several years to give us the variety we want. So you take the same variety and then you get something that you want, but this takes us 10 to 15 years to do. With a GMO, you have a specific target gene that you're interested in. For GMOs, this generally comes from a gene from a different species. We extract it out and we put it into a plant that would give that plant a specific trait. So you can see gene, we put them together and we get a plant that can do something specific for you. And that is what we call a GMO. But I think you probably already know this. To put this into a proper perspective, into something that's familiar to you, these are products that we have had hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So this is what a carrot looked like before we had a domestication of agriculture and products. This doesn't look very appetizing to me. I'd much rather eat a crunchy, juicy, tasty carrot. Same for bananas. Many products that we eat today on a daily basis have been conventionally bred for its agronomic attributes, so the benefit to the farmer, its taste, its nutritional value. So this is where the history of agricultural products come from. Traditional conventional breeding and GMOs. And Jens touched on new genomic techniques, which I will also speak on a bit later. Briefly, what value has GMOs added to our lives? I think I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but one that stands out for me is the reduction of pesticides. So, for example, one GMO product we have today that's grown globally is insect-resistant maize. This is a product that the maize itself can resist a particular pest, like Buseola fusca or stem borer. And instead of a farmer having to spray the whole environment with broad pesticides, you have a plant that does it for you. So you've got a massive reduction of pesticides. That's just one environmental benefit. So I've said, what's a GMO? What value it adds? Where do we have GMOs in South Africa? We have, well, in the world, sorry, in 26 countries, only 5 developed nations, the bulk of which are developing nations. So the top 5 producers is the United States, Brazil, Argentina, Canada, and India. And this is what's been grown since the late 90s till about 2018. You can see very little in Africa, very little in Europe, mostly Asia, Australia. Africa is just 2 countries up until 2018, and then South America and North America. This is very interesting. You know, Africa is food scarce, Europe is food secure. Now to the crux of the conversation and to go to Sanka's question, what is the basis of, currently the basis of regulation is 2 influencing factors: the ratification of the Cartagena Protocol, which is on biosafety, which is the safe handling, transport, and use of living modified organisms, and then whether the regulation is product versus process based. That is the genetic process regulated, the genetic process to create the trait, or the actual final product? And we've just put a list here of countries that go product or process. The US, for example, is product. That means, does the product have a GMO in it? Can we detect the transgene? That's what they look at. Brazil, South Africa, Pakistan, we look at the process. Was a GMO technique used to develop the product? So it doesn't really matter whether the end product has the transgene, it's all about the process. And what are the distinctions of this regulation? Approvals for cultivation, so can I grow the crop in my country? Am I just importing, exporting, which is what Jens talked about earlier? And are we gonna import it to just consume it, or for humans or for animals? And this is all based on risk, and each country does this differently. to answer Sanka's question about 20 years later. So in those 26 countries that have grow GMO crops, technically we've had a live 20-odd year trial of planting GMO crops, eating GMO crops. I'm going to tell you just now what crops these are. And the reason why we've had such strong regulation is the perception and the fears surrounding GMOs. So personally, what I would do that would make, and Jens kind of mentioned it in his talk, is about the trade and the importing and exporting. So when you have a product in the USA and you go through the product-based regulation, doesn't matter, you still have to go through it in South Africa because it's process-based. And if I had any powers, and I have zero powers, I'm not a regulator, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a scientist who works with the South African seed industry, we would say, I would go back in time and I would say, let's think about the future and let's think that we all live, like it or not, in a global agricultural economy. There are ships going every day, transporting food back and forth from nations and trucks going. How do we make sure that these innovations support the people it's meant to? It's all meant for food security, but we can't, if we cannot efficiently move it around the world to get it to where it needs to be, are we dealing with food security efficiently? So it's really about having synchrony in our regulations. This is just what crops we have to date, GMO crops. You can see the bulk is soybeans, maize, cotton, and canola. In South Africa, we only have soybean, maize, and cotton, probably in about the ratios represented in this pie chart. Additional small other crops is sugar beets, potatoes, squash, papaya, and brinjal. I think brinjal is in India mainly. So this is, and I think just to mention here, the traits are both single traits and stacked traits. So we have products that have more than one GM trait in it. And this is this orange line that has been growing steadily over the years. Sanka, do you have another question? Can I continue? Can't hear you, Sanka.
No, okay, now here I am. No, just continue. It's very interesting, and I will post the questions perhaps a bit afterwards, and I don't want to interrupt you now.
Okay, so this is, so I've told you what's the GMO, where are the GMOs, what sort of regulations we have, what crops we're talking about. And 20 odd years ago, and maybe the lawyers who are around then will say that we never thought this exception of GMOs that we'd be seeing worldwide. We never thought further than the actual science of it. But today, last year, in fact, these two scientists, and I'm very proud to say there's two ladies in this session. I don't know if we can compare to these two ladies, but they won a Nobel Prize for discovering the CRISPR. And CRISPR is, it's amazing as to what CRISPR can offer us, and its impact is across the industries, not just agriculture. It can be used in health and medicine, but basically CRISPR in genome editing says you can just edit specific points in a DNA. So it's really, really precise. The impact of us getting it wrong in terms of what you're wanting to do. So you could potentially fix something, or you could potentially add a specific trait. And this is, Jens touched on it, and I'm going to say this has been, yes, highly political, very polarized, and we wished we could have avoided all of this because every industry has innovation. And sadly, when it comes to agriculture, innovation is seen to be something dangerous and something unfair to the consumer and to the farmer. I don't know how I would change that, but I just want to say that 30 years ago, we didn't think we would have these new innovations, and I wish if we could go back in time, we could write our regulations to consider that we would move forward as a scientific community. We say here government should avoid arbitrary and unjustifiable distinctions between crops developed through gene editing and crops developed through conventional breeding. Because the fact of the matter is, scientifically, we will not be able to distinguish the two. They look the same, and on a PCR, they probably will look the same as well. These are the various regulation statuses. I've not classed it. This is out of a document from green to red, with green being there are no unique regulations. So countries that would fall in the green bandwidth is Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, whereas a country in the limit, in the red, in the dark red, for example, Chile falls in the green for plants, but in the red for animals. Ukraine and Mexico are in the red for both. So again, we are going for asynchronous approvals. Countries are dealing with this differently. Perhaps more scientists should be involved in these discussions. Should laws evolve? There was a paper published in February, Turnbull et al., and they say in their paper, and they also say in this paper that regulators are going to have a difficult time and they should have to consider this GMO, the scope of GMOs, and now this new technology. And they say in this paper, as technology rapidly develops in all sectors, including science, you should find that law and its interpretation must reflect the values, the mores of the developing societal sector, and we have to evolve. Regulations should evolve to support science. I think COVID-19 is an example of that. I think that's my last slide.
Okay, so
Yes.
I think there will be, perhaps as it is a very polemic and a very discussed topic, there will be some questions afterwards in the Q&A part. I only have the question, do you think that not only scientists should be involved, but let's say biologists should be involved, but other kinds of science should be applied here, which refers to the economy situation, to kind of a balance between the farmer and the industry, which are still there, which are kind of conflict situations between the two sectors. Maybe sometimes the industry is using GMOs in a kind of monopolized way. So all these questions may be or should be considered when it comes to a new regulation from your point of view, or is it only that the scientists as such should be listened to more than before?
No, thank you, Stanka. That's really a good question. And I truly believe that everybody needs to be involved. I think any democratic society should ask the question to all sectors of society. And certainly that is the case in South Africa, I'm happy to say. And when there are discussions, when government is considering, they do consult with not just scientists, with farmers, with social scientists, economists. In fact, the regulations itself within South Africa has representation from several ministries to ensure that we consider everything. And I think the farmers specifically is who the government listens to. While we're all in the conversation, they are the ones that has the government's ear. And I can give you an example that it was the farmers who came to us as the seed industry and said, we want newer technologies, not necessarily gene editing. Yes, they do, but they know that there's a technology in Argentina that those farmers are planting. How do we, in a big farming community, allow them to compete competitively by not providing these new technologies? So, you know, I think farmers have a big say, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Thank you. I think then.
Yeah, thank you.
No, please, yeah, I wanted just to you, Ivan, for the next set of questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lukashny. That was very interesting, and as I mentioned before, it gives a lot of food of thoughts and discussion, which possibly would be great to have it in a special session and conference, even to discuss all these topics, or all the point of view from different angles, from different jurisdictions, and so on and so on. So yeah, please, Ivan, go ahead.
Yes, Sonke, if we still have a minute, I would ask another question to Lukashny. So I think that GMO, the question of GMO is very, I mean, discussed question, and sometimes very political, then it's very speculative, etc. And that's very important to discuss it on a broad range of arenas, including the legal one. You mentioned in the course of your presentation that one of the key challenges to introduction to GMO, because obviously you support this idea and development of GMO, it's the fear. So we see that a lot of people fear of GMO products in many continents, because I don't know whether they don't trust, they don't believe, they think that this can ruin their lives, their health, etc. So besides this fear, besides this, I mean, lack of information, what do you think to be another challenge for GMO introduction? How these GMO products must be developed further, and what should be done by the world?
What should be done by?
What should be done by the world, by everyone, in order for GMO to be supported?
I think one of the mistakes that was made in the past is that GMOs were portrayed as a silver bullet. They were marketed as something that was going to solve the world's problems. And I think there are areas of the world that don't have such problems and don't need GMOs. And I think the technology, it's a good technology. It's had benefits in places, and we have to be, everybody has a cell phone today because everybody needs a cell phone today, but does everybody need a GMO? And because you don't need it, doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And people have this fear that, oh, I don't want a GMO in my country because maybe I'll grow horns out of my head or something, because that is what a lot of the NGOs say. They have been making people fearful. And maybe it's okay in European countries where food is in abundance, you can afford to have those fears. But when those fears start getting translated into African countries where hunger is a daily battle. So you have a challenge of the perception and the false stories, but also from the GMO side, it wasn't meant to be a silver bullet to agricultural problems. It has a role to play, and each trait brings in something different for both the farmer and the consumer, and same with newer technologies. Not one single technology will fix all our problems.
But still, should it be regulated, and how strong?
Yes, I think it should be regulated. If it is not regulated, you will get people introducing products as they wish, and we need to ensure that our agriculture remains formal and up to standard. Yes, regulations should be there, and they are good. Why do we have regulations? Any regulations? It's the fundamental part of all our societies, whether it is how I drive a car, I need a license, I need to drive a roadworthy vehicle, the vehicle has to be licensed. All of these things fall in the same gambit as GMOs. Regulations are important, but it should not be unreasonable.
Thank you. Thank you, Lukashny. That was very interesting presentation. Sonke, do you have some more questions? If not, then I think we may proceed to the other speaker. We also have a final speaker today. Mr. Donavilla. I don't know whether, okay, so we have Donavilla, hello. Right now we are flying from South Africa to Canada, and we fly from the topics of technologies in production to hardware technologies, I would say. So those technologies that help you to cultivate the products and to have this production effective, efficient, and better collected. I don't know. So, and there are many technologies that presently is developing right now, and what we're interested in is the legal approach to that, and what are the risks what associated with this technology's adoption, and what's going on in this sphere. So please, Sedona, the stage is yours.
Sure. Thanks so much for the introduction, Ivan. And I have to say, I much prefer, like probably the rest of the lawyers in this forum, to hear Dr. Lakeshni tell us more about GMOs and the science behind it all. No offense to you, gents, either, but I'm sure we want to hear from the scientists. So thanks for that. So bear with me while I tell you a little bit more about the liability framework associated with AgTech largely. The jurisdiction I sit on in Canada is, and I don't think it's very different from other jurisdictions across the world, and probably a good segue from what we talked about already in our session, is that you see where you have innovation and you have laws, there's always a gap, no matter the sector you're in. Could be innovation, early adoption here in AgTech. You'd have it in construction sites, you have it in mining sites, you have it in automotive, transportation, whatever it is. And what we find is this paradigm between the law is always trying to catch up. Meanwhile, the technology is developed and ready to be adopted. And what I think when we have a paradigm shift, say from technologies from 30, 40 years ago, say like a TV type of technology, is that now technologies, once ready to go to the market, that adoption cycle is actually that much shorter, making liability issues that much more problematic. Largely speaking, smart products in agriculture are no different from a liability legal lens perspective than smart products in other industries. And I think I would bucket those liability risks largely in three main categories. You have the regulatory concerns, you've got the contractual concerns, and then you've got litigation. And you might say, well, for who? Well, largely speaking, it's for the ecosystem players. For AgTech specifically, you would have the manufacturers of these products, the suppliers, the distributors. Here in Canada, the manufacturer and distributor very much have similar duties of care when it comes to actually putting that product in the market. From a common law perspective, there's also some statutory obligations that the distributor will carry as well here in our particular jurisdiction. And then you've got the liability risk when it comes to litigation. Happy to share that just like any other early adoption, probably, and we've already seen this in the US from what I've watched in terms of litigation. I haven't seen in Canada any yet. Is the early litigation we've seen when it comes to AgTech is actually intellectual property litigation, trade secret litigation. But when it comes to those three buckets that I discussed, probably the more concerning one likely is going to be the contractual piece, because that's how people do business. The regulatory piece, like I said, laws are still catching up. We're not without laws, though. As I often tell my clients, you still have to go through the traditional framework that we have to analyze what kind of regulatory obligations you have in putting that smart product in the market. I think when it comes to probably two key issues that are hotly debated, certainly in our jurisdiction here in Canada, certainly in the US that I've seen as well, are probably two key issues that you see come up when it comes to the adoption of smart tech. One, and you may have not seen it only in the agricultural kind of context, is the right to repair. So farmers' right to repair their own equipment. And the other one is data ownership. One, the data ownership piece, as you've seen in other industries, everybody's scared who has the data, who's got ownership over the data, who can collect, who can use, what are the risks of actually somebody somehow inadvertently or purposefully hacking into a system and getting sort of business information that may actually put that particular farming operation at risk. But the right to repair, I wanted to focus a little bit more on. It's gotten some media attention very recently in our jurisdiction, certainly in the US once Biden came into power. I don't know if you've got US lawyers here. That's something that Biden did early on in his administration, actually basically told the federal at the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to say, you know, I need you to specifically limit the manufacturer's ability to basically restrict owners of equipment to not be able to actually repair their own equipment. When it comes to farmers specifically, in Canada, there was actually an early report this year, early in the summer, where a farmer basically said, "Hey, I had an issue with my combine equipment. There was a software glitch, and I couldn't repair it myself because basically I had to go through a particular dealer who had to bring somebody to check this particular software code, run it up, reset the system, and then I wasted 2 hours. In that 2-hour time, I could have been making with that particular equipment about 20,000 worth of canola." Like, he's basically equating the loss of time associated with his inability to actually fix his own equipment. Certain manufacturers, large multinational manufacturers of agricultural equipment, have used this as, well, no, we're doing this for your own good. We want to ensure that only certified folks are going to touch that equipment. Only certified parts are going to be able to replace whatever is sort of not working or purportedly defective, so that equipment is safe, so that it doesn't inhibit with whatever emission standards you have to abide by, so that it's from a security perspective, it's secure, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there is a little bit of a clash of, and we'll see how this develops. I mean, certainly in our jurisdiction, the clash seems to be between farmers' rights to want to repair their own equipment and the manufacturers wanting to control that, for seemingly wanting to ensure that they have a safe product out there to be used. Or perhaps, I don't know, perhaps it's to control the way that product gets repaired for their own economic benefit. And moving sort of less about sort of an ownership kind of model and more to a licensing kind of model with lots of warranties and representation in terms of how they limit their liability. But ultimately, I think what's interesting here is that certainly in our jurisdiction, there's been a move through different agricultural stakeholder associations, basically saying this should be common sense. There should be regulation around this that allows us to do this. We shouldn't be fighting over, you know, we bought $500,000 worth of equipment. Why are we having a tough time figuring out that, you know, we've got a right to repair our own products, and they've got to make it easy for us to do so and not difficult. So I think those would be sort of two key hot topics in this area from a liability point of view. And if you wish, I can continue on, but given the time, maybe I'll stop there.
Okay, just let me look. Let me have a look. The next question would be, I don't know, specifically, what is currently the state of regulatory framework of AgTech? I mean, does it have an approach from the one side or another? Is there an approach through the data side, for instance, or from the hardware, or from whatever?
I think I alluded a little bit earlier to this. I think the regulatory world is playing catch up, to be honest with you, when it comes to smart products, period.
Okay.
I think in our jurisdiction, we've got constitutionally, it's a little bit complicated in Canada because we got 3 levels of government. So you've got the federal level of government, under our constitution has certain oversight over safety standards generally of this type of equipment on certain lands. And then you've got provincial government who will have oversight as well. And then you'll have the municipal government as well. And it's a bit of a hot mix basically when it comes to who's got what say, depending on the type of adoption of the smart agricultural product. The good news is when it comes to the use of that smart product on farmland, you're generally on private property. So there is a lot of assistance there to farmers, but in terms of commercializing that product from the manufacturers and distributors point of view, there's a lot of levels of regulation that you'd have to pass to be able to actually sell, market that product in our jurisdiction. Now, one area that I think, so the short answer is no specific ag tech law in Canada yet. I don't think it's going to come up anytime soon, but there is a view, and at least here in our jurisdiction, the three levels of government have largely been agnostic. So they haven't preferred one way of doing things from a regulatory point of view, and have sort of relied on the traditional, the systems already in place in the way that we govern ourselves to be able to say there's sufficient oversight, let technology play out, let us understand all the issues, then we'll come in with a regulation. So with that agnostic approach, I think generally the innovators have been helped so far, but it remains to be seen how that will work once you have a larger commercialization and adoption of this type of equipment.
Okay, so for the time being, or from the time issue, perhaps the last question, Ivan, if you allow, which refers to the data issue, big data. Big data is an issue, as we all know, and the ownership of data sets may be very important in terms of ag tech. As all the technology goes through data and through data sets about climate, weather, needs of water, and whatsoever. And this may be in one hand, on the hand of few. So let's focus on the big data register in the context of ag tech. How do ecosystem players mitigate against the risk of potential vulnerabilities in the technology that may cause economic losses and personal injuries, not only personal injuries, but injuries in general to the users of technology?
Yeah, I'm happy if anybody has an interest in that. I'm happy to chat offline as well. But the quick answer to that is I think the contracts that folks have entered into will set out the parameters of those rights and obligations of parties when it comes to a product failure that leads to, or maybe related to a data vulnerability with the product that causes potential economic loss or personal injury to the users of those products. That's a quick answer. The other part of it is depending on who you are representing. So whether you are on for the farming entity that's adopted the technology, or you're on for the manufacturer or distributor of that equipment at large, you will want to consider whether insurance, certainly in our jurisdiction, is an effective means of transferring risk and ensuring that you're not just getting insurance, talking to your broker and getting insurance for the sake of insurance, but that you're reading that policy of insurance, looking at the coverage available, looking at the limits of coverage, and sort of saying, okay, if I have a loss, how much is it really going to expose me, and am I appropriately covered for this? That's a quick answer to that, Sanke.
Okay, thank you. I think, and I'm afraid that we are coming to the end of our session here, and unfortunately we can not admit, although I see that not too many questions here. So I don't know, Sarah, do you want to have remarks on that, or what shall we do? Sarah, are you still here? No, then I will take over.
I think we have Sarah, but her microphone is off.
Okay.
Yeah. So Sonke, so do we have a minute for the question from the audience? I don't know whether or we are.
Question. Do we have questions here?
So if someone has questions, let me double check. So if someone has question, please ask in the chat. I think that we don't.
Okay.
Okay. So I think that's it. If that was actually a great presentation from all of the speakers. I would like to thank everyone, to Jens, to Edona, and to Lukashny. That was very interesting discussion about the technologies, about the market acceptance from Jens, about the export and import regulations, about the technologies from Canada. So I would also like to thank everyone who listened and participated. Sonke, also, if you wish to say something.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much again for everybody who attended actively and passively this webinar. Let's say, or this, not only the webinar, this afternoon, and I think we had some good inputs here, and it gives us a lot of interesting food for thought, and it's not only agri-food, it's about, I think, food. So, or thoughts food. So I think then, yeah, let's continue with the discussion about GMOs, technologies, and import and export regulations, which will continue forever. I think this is the food industry and agro industry is still in development and will never stop, and we will see new needs in the future, so new discussions will come up. So I thank you, and have a nice day, have a great evening, and keep in touch.
Good night. Bye everyone. Thank you.
Bye everybody.